My name is Clara, and I am 34 years old. People say heartbreak leaves you hollow, but mine didn't just hollow me, it carved me open and left me bleeding in silence. What I'm about to share is the kind of story no woman ever dreams she'll tell about her own marriage, but life has a way of ripping illusions apart when you least expect it. I wasn't always this broken. I used to be the girl who believed love could heal anything. Growing up in a small town, I carried with me this fierce belief that if you gave your whole heart to someone, if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and kept forgiving, they would see your worth. That belief shaped everything I did, especially when it came to my marriage. When I met David, I thought I had found safety. He was calm, steady, the kind of man who never raised his voice and always made sure I got home safely. After years of unstable relationships, of chasing after men who thrived on chaos, David felt like an anchor. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't unpredictable, he was reliable. And I mistook that reliability for love. In the beginning, we built a quiet life. We married young, just a couple of years after meeting, and I told myself that our simple, steady routine was a sign of maturity. He worked long hours, and I filled my evenings planning meals, picking out curtains, and daydreaming about the family we'd someday have. It wasn't perfect, but I believed it was enough. Still, something always gnawed at the edges of my happiness. David rarely looked at me the way men look at women they desire. He was kind, thoughtful, even affectionate at times, but there was no spark, no fire. I told myself it didn't matter, that love didn't need passion to survive. But in the quiet moments when the house felt too still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was invisible to him. The truth exploded into my life on a night I will never forget. I had planned a small dinner at home, something simple but thoughtful. His favorite pasta candles lit, soft music humming in the background. I wanted to bridge the growing distance between us. For the first hour, it felt like it might actually work. He smiled more than usual, even laughed, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we were finding our way back. But then came the third glass of wine. His words started to loosen. His tone shifted, and when he leaned back in his chair with that drunken smirk, I knew something dark was about to spill out. "You're a nice girl," he said, his voice slurred just slightly. "That's why I stayed with you." At first I smiled, not understanding, but then he kept going. "I've never really been attracted to you," he admitted, laughing, as if it were some harmless confession. "Not in that way. You're safe. You make sure everything's fine. But you're not my type." The room spun. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles went white. But he wasn't finished. He started describing his type: someone wilder, sharper, darker, someone completely opposite of me. And then, with the ease of a man telling a story that didn't matter, he admitted he had found someone like that. "One thing led to another," he said. He trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. I understood. My husband, the man I thought chose me, had never truly wanted me at all. The words hit like knives. My chest caved in with every syllable. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was the way he told me. No remorse, no regret, just a drunk man justifying why he had never seen me as enough. That night, lying in bed beside him as he snored, I stared at the ceiling and felt something in me collapse. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just knew with a clarity sharper than pain that our marriage was already over. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I would vanish. I didn't leave a note. I didn't pack a dramatic suitcase or slam the door. I learned long ago that true exits are quiet, almost polite. If you want to disappear, you do it with the same care you would use to fold a wedding dress into tissue paper, slow, steady, precise. At dawn, I slipped out of bed, my body moving like a ghost through the rooms I had spent years carefully curating for a version of love that never loved me back. I took my passport, birth certificate, my grandmother's locket, the external drive with my designs, and the cash I had squirreled away in a fireproof tin that David never knew existed. I left my phone in a kitchen drawer, powered down, because I didn't want to carry his voice with me, not even as pixels. I drove east until the city was a rumor in the rearview mirror, and the sunrise turned the highway into a velvet ribbon. The world felt new and raw, like skin after a burn. Everything hurt and somehow also promised healing. By noon, I reached the coastal town where my aunt used to take me summers when I was a kid, the only place I had ever been allowed to be messy and loud and curious without being told I was too much. The air smelled of salt and fried dough gulls crying like they knew all our secrets. I rented a month-to-month sublet above a closed bookstore with peeling blue paint, the kind of place where no one asks questions as long as the rent arrives on time. The first night, sleep came in scraps. I kept seeing his face, hearing that lazy confession. "You're a nice girl. I've never really been attracted to you," as if he were still sitting at our table swirling wine, like it could absolve him. When I did drift off, I woke choking on the phantom weight of his indifference. In the dark, I pressed my grandmother's locket into my palm until the edges bit my skin. I whispered to whatever version of God still tolerated me, "If love is a mirror, please don't let me be invisible in it anymore." In the morning, I made lists. Grief makes you think you need theatrics, but what you actually need is a spreadsheet. I wrote down everything I could control: change my email, revoke, shared passwords, freeze joint credit lines, call a lawyer, find work. The lawyer was a brisk woman with a voice like a metronome. She listened to me without flinching. "Infidelity matters in the story," she said, "even when it doesn't win the courtroom. Document everything." She showed me how to pull the phone records I still had access to from our carrier account, how to request banking statements, how to take pictures of the house before he started staging a new version of our life for strangers. I cried once on the call, which embarrassed me, and she said, "Don't apologize. You're building a bridge out of a fire. Cry if you need to. Then keep walking." Finding work was easier than finding air. Before David, before the quiet life, I had been a textile designer with a ruthless eye for color. I'd packed that part of me away like a summer dress in a winter closet. On my external drive lived hundreds of patterns, sun-soaked tiles, inspired by Andalusian courtyards, storm-bloom florals pulled from childhood gardens, a set of deep indigos I'd titled Undertow because they reminded me of the way grief tugs. I emailed a boutique homewares company I'd once freelanced for. 2 days later, they wired an advance for a capsule collection and asked for a new series by Thursday. The urgency steadied me. My hands remembered what my heart had forgotten: they made things. They made beauty from scraps. In the afternoons, I walked the shore until my calves ached. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who thought steadiness meant safety, even if it meant dimming herself down to a pilot light. I remembered my mother warning me that men liked good women, the kind that didn't ask for too much. My mother had died when I was 19, and I had turned her warning into a blueprint, confusing smallness with goodness, obedience with love. Standing at the waterline with my jeans rolled up, I realized I had built an entire life on a foundation of hush. On the third day, my sister called the bookstore landline, which meant she had already guessed where I'd run. May has always been the one who can find me when I go quiet. The store owner, a man with newsprint fingers, who introduced himself only as Pete, knocked upstairs and handed me the receiver like a relic. "Clara." May breathed. "I saw your location go dark, and then I remembered the beach. Are you safe?" I could have told her everything right then, spilled the drunk confession, the years of absence disguised as gentleness. The way I had starved myself to fit inside his idea of a safe woman. Instead, I told her the only sentence that mattered: "I'm choosing me." She made a sound that was half sob, half cheer. "Good. Do you want me to come?" I looked around at the little apartment with its crooked window and sunlit floorboards at the desk where my patterns were unfurling like wings. "Not yet," I said, "but soon." That night, I opened the locket. Inside was a faded photo of my grandmother on her wedding day. Cheeks flushed, a ribbon in her hair, a stubbornness in her eyes that the camera couldn't tame. "She left my grandfather 3 times," my mother used to say before he learned to show up. I had mocked that story, called it myth-making. Now I understood its marrow. Sometimes a woman has to vanish to teach the world how to see her. On the 5th morning, he finally noticed. Or maybe he noticed the first day and told himself I was sulking at a friend's place. Either way, the emails began. "Where are you? This isn't funny. Let's talk. I don't even remember what I said that upset you. You're overreacting. Please, Clara. The subject lines were a map of a man walking in circles. I didn't answer. My lawyer wrote the first official reply on my behalf. We would be filing for separation. We would require full financial transparency. We would request exclusive use of the house until the proceedings were finalized. It was surgical and clean and devoid of apology. When he texted the landline, which of course went nowhere, I imagined the message floating out to sea. The town began stitching me back to myself. Pete kept a tab of tea and cinnamon buns for the artist upstairs. A teenage girl from the cafe asked if she could watch me draw because she never met a woman who makes wallpaper. I laughed for the first time in weeks, the kind that pushes your ribs open and lets light in. At twilight, I'd see couples walking hand in hand on the pier, and I would feel the ache and not run from it. I let it sit beside me like weather. Heartbreak is not humiliation, I told myself. It's evidence that you were brave enough to love with both hands. But betrayal, that's humiliation masquerading as your fault. I refused to carry his shame like a handbag. 2 Sundays after I left, my aunt sent a box to the bookstore. Inside were my mother's old journals tied with twine and a note thought you might need the women behind you. I lit a candle that smelled like vanilla and salt and read until midnight. In those pages, my mother admitted to her own hungers, her fears the nights she had stared at a ceiling, and asked why love so often asks women to disappear. I wept for the girl I had been and the woman I was unbecoming. By the end of the month, my capsule collection sold out its pre-order. The company asked if I'd consider licensing my patterns to a larger brand. I said yes, but on my terms. That phrase startled me, like tasting a flavor I'd sworn off on my terms. I said it out loud just to hear it ring. My voice didn't break. It sounded like a bell. And still the story was only starting to unfold. Because the thing about vanishing is that it makes space for secrets to surface, some you expected, some you never could have imagined. The first secret arrived in a manila envelope forwarded from our old house, addressed to me in a scrawl I recognized from childhood. My father's handwriting, the father who left when I was 8 and whose name we spoke only in past tense. Inside, among brittle letters and a photograph of a woman with my mouth, was a confession that would rearrange everything I thought I knew about desire and debt and the lineage of women who choose to stay or run. I held the photo up to the light, my heartbeat a startled bird in my throat, and felt the old floor of my life tilt again. I had left a husband who didn't want me. It turned out I was also about to find a family story that didn't want to stay buried. The handwriting in that manila envelope wouldn't leave my mind. It was shaky but unmistakable, my father's. The man who had vanished when I was 8. The man my mother described as a ghost, who preferred freedom to responsibility. He had become the shadow I measured all my relationships against, the reason I clung so tightly to David in the first place. I had told myself I'd never end up abandoned again. But here was his voice reaching for me through brittle paper and faded ink. Inside were letters he had written but never sent. They told of nights he sat in motels wishing he had fought harder to stay, of shame that kept him away, of a family secret. My mother never confessed that she had pushed him out. Not because he was cruel, but because he discovered her own betrayal. In one letter he wrote, "I couldn't keep pretending I was the only one guilty of wanting something more. Your mother loved another man long before she left me." I read those words over and over, the pages trembling in my hands. My mother, who taught me that women must be small to be loved, had carried her own hunger in silence. And my father, who I thought had abandoned us, had been exiled by a truth too ugly to share. Suddenly my whole childhood rearranged itself. The fractures in their marriage weren't born of one man's weakness but of two people who couldn't bear to confront their own desires. The photograph tucked into the bundle was of a woman I had never met, but her mouth curved like mine, her eyes sharp with defiance. On the back my father had scrawled, "Your aunt. Ask her about the things your mother wouldn't say." For days I carried that photo in my pocket, pacing the beach with the tide gnawing at my ankles. I thought I had run from one betrayal only to stumble into another, a generational inheritance of silence and shame. Was I doomed to repeat it? Was invisibility in love the only script written for women like me? But one evening, as the gulls scattered against a violet sky, I felt something shift. Maybe these buried truths weren't curses, they were warnings. My mother had hidden her hunger, my father had fled his shame, but I had a choice. I could break the pattern. So I called the number scrawled in one of the letters. My aunt's voice, husky with age, answered after the third ring. When I introduced myself, there was a pause heavy with years. Then she whispered, Clara. I wondered when you'd find me. The next day, I boarded a train inland. The photograph pressed against my palm, ready to face the woman who might hold the missing pieces of a story I had been living in blind. My aunt lived in a weathered farmhouse just outside a sleepy town, the kind of place where time moved slower and secrets settled into the walls like dust. When she opened the door, I was struck by how much she resembled the woman in the photograph. Same sharp eyes, same curve of the mouth that seemed permanently caught between laughter and defiance. She hugged me like she had known me my whole life. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just the kind of embrace that said, "Finally, you're here." Over tea that smelled faintly of mint and smoke, she told me everything my mother never had. My mother and father had been passionate once, almost recklessly so, but passion often leaves scars. When my mother's affections drifted to another man, a man my aunt called the great mistake, she hid it beneath perfection. My father, broken but unwilling to expose her, carried the blame instead. When he left, it wasn't abandonment, it was exile wrapped in silence. I sat there, hands trembling around the chipped mug, realizing how much of my life had been shaped by lies of omission. My mother had raised me on warnings about being good and safe for men, never admitting that she herself had chosen fire once, even if it burned her. My father had let me believe he was weak, rather than confess that he had been betrayed. And I had carried both of their ghosts into my marriage, mistaking safety for love, mistaking endurance for worth. Your mother thought she was protecting you, my aunt said, her voice low, but shielding you from the truth only left you defenseless. You deserve to know that love isn't always tidy, that sometimes passion is destructive, but sometimes it's the only thing that reminds us we're alive. That night, as I lay in the spare bedroom, beneath a quilt, stitched with wild colors, I thought about the legacy I had inherited. Generations of women who dimmed themselves to fit into cages, generations of men who walked away rather than fight the fire. And here I was at the crossroads. For the first time in weeks, I didn't just feel abandoned, I felt chosen. By my aunt's honesty, by my father's fragile letters, by my own decision to leave David. Maybe betrayal wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was the prologue to finally writing my own. The next morning, I packed my bag with a different kind of resolve. I wasn't just running anymore, I was reclaiming. When I left my aunt's farmhouse, I carried more than a bag of clothes. I carried the weight of a new truth, heavy and yet strangely liberating. My mother's silence, my father's shame, my aunt's honesty, they all wove together into a map I had never seen before. And it pointed in one direction, forward, not back. I returned to the coastal town with a steadier heart. The little bookstore apartment felt less like a hiding place now and more like a launch pad. My patterns were selling, my lawyer was steadying the battlefield of divorce, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. But David wasn't finished. His emails had grown frantic, then angry, then pathetic. You're overreacting. I didn't mean it like that. We can fix this if you just talk to me. The final one broke the pattern. If you don't come home, you'll regret it. I read those words in the dim light of the bookstore's desk lamp, my hands shaking, not with fear but with clarity. He thought regret was mine to carry. But regret had already moved into his body, whether he knew it or not. The man who once laughed off his betrayal was now begging the woman he never desired to come back. That was the cruel irony of betrayal. It circles back, a blade that cuts the hand that first swung it. Weeks turned to months. My capsule collection became a full line. A major retailer reached out offering a licensing deal that would set me up for years. When I signed the contract, I didn't think of David. I thought of my grandmother's locket, my mother's journals, my father's fragile letters. I thought of all the women who had folded themselves smaller and smaller just to fit into the cages of men's approval. I thought of the girl I had once been hungry to be chosen, blind to the fact that I could choose myself. The day the divorce finalized, I walked barefoot on the beach, the decree folded in my pocket. The ocean roared like it was applauding, and for the first time in years, I laughed loud, unafraid, the kind of laugh that doesn't ask permission. And I knew then that this wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of a cycle. If you are watching this, and you've ever been told you weren't enough, if you've ever been betrayed by the person you trusted most, let my story remind you sometimes the greatest act of revenge isn't anger or destruction. It's building a life so luminous that the people who tried to diminish you are forced to see what they lost. So if this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me, when was the moment you realized that walking away was the beginning of becoming whole again?